Hello there, welcome to Doctor Who Radio Show. I'm That's the Way It Goes 09, and these lovely gents with me are
Matt from Florida,
Tim from Texas,
and in this free-chapter episode of Doctor Who Radio Show, this is your only chance to view this in person, because then it will be edited and turned into something totally different. It will regenerate into a new form. In this, we'll be looking at the third, the fourth, and fifth Doctors, spanning the TV series Doctor Who from 1972 up to 1984. And, well, let's start with the third Doctor, Jon Pertwee. The year is 1970. The series has been given a reprieve and also a total reboot, even before many years before the new series reboot in 2005. The Doctor was exiled to Earth by the Time Lords, and the first time you see the Doctor as Jon Pertwee is as he's falling literally out of the TARDIS straight away, an adventure with the Autons, Spearhead from space, and the reintroduction and the beginning of the Unit family and Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart, played by Nicholas Courtney. So, what was the third Doctor as Jon Pertwee and a character, and also for this reboot of Doctor Who at the time?
Well, yeah, I think it does bear noting that upon regenerating, the second Doctor was supposed to have the ability to pick his regeneration, although Jon Pertwee's form was ultimately not his decision, but chosen via the Time Lords because he was too picky about who he wanted to look like.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe this is the only option or point within the history of the show where he was actually given the ability to choose what he was going to look like. But also when he wakes up in the hospital, that might be the quickest he's ever adjusted to a new body. He just goes from hating it to liking it within the span of 3 seconds. So, I thought that was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
What did you think, Tim, about his introduction in Spearhead in space?
Well, it's pretty cool. I mean, he picks out a costume, tries a trilby, doesn't like it. He steals a car, and later has one made for him. He's definitely a different animal than the second Doctor was.
And he's also the only Doctor who could make running away in a wheelchair look amazing.
Yeah.
And as someone that operates one himself, I can appreciate that.
Yeah. Plus, he's a gadget Doctor. He gets all the gizmos, and you know, he likes having toys to play with.
Yes. If you noticed during that time in the States, the James Bond craze was sweeping the nation. So I guess that was the show's sort of way of keeping up with the times, as it were.
Yes, that's true. It was also the debonair gadgets, action men. You had Evel Knievel sort of gaining popularity. You have all these sort of shows like The Persuaders and The Pretenders, and Jason King, very similar. So, just like the second Doctor, he more than ever, more up to date I think than the second Doctor's appearance, was quite simply not only that, you know, with the times as it were, but actually Jon Pertwee himself was an action man. He was in the Second World War, a spy behind the lines and all that sort of thing. And he was a big, enthusiastic motorbike. He had a motorbike collection. Doctor Who magazine in the last few months has actually printed an unknown, not originally seen interview with him a few years before he died in 1996. And one picture has him in front of his house with all these lovely motorbikes. So, you had all throughout his time as the Doctor. The third Doctor progressed. He became more flamboyant, some sort of karate. But in Spearhead in Space, he's sort of seducing the audience, but he's also subdued in terms of flamboyancy. And it's on film. Later on, they would become more sort of studio colour-based. And it really would feel like the 70s. Really feel like the 70s. Who would you say, was the best sort of monster for Jon Pertwee's era?
I think the best sort of monster for Jon Pertwee's era was the monster in the man known as the Master.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
He and Roger Delgado just had some sort of great relationship.
Yeah.
The way they would one-up each other.
And the Master was less of a cartoon at that time. Slightly overused, though, in his second season. I mean, he's in every story. He's, Delgado was pretty much a regular.
So, not to derail us from the topic, but I'd like to state that, according to some breaking news here, Sammy Carter, our friend in the West Midlands, I believe, claims that one of his mates might have found another missing episode of Doctor Who. We shall see. And now back to your regularly scheduled podcast here, Mr. David Aston.
As Tim suggested, the Master in the Jon Pertwee era became a cartoon. What was the difference between, I suppose, like Jon Pertwee's Doctor in a way? It sort of lost the series. So how did Roger Delgado go from being a rather cold Master to a more sort of, appearing all the time, would you say, Tim?
No, what I meant was the Delgado Master was a very good Master. It was the later versions that ended up being kind of cartoony, the 80s version.
Oh, I see.
And but all I said was also that they kind of overused him a little bit. I mean, it's a bit much in season 8 where he's in every story. But I'm guessing they hired him on as a regular, so that's good. But then after that they pulled it back a little, and he appears 3 more times before the actor unfortunately died.
That's true. He died in a.
And that unfortunately was one of the main factors in Jon Pertwee deciding to leave.
Yeah.
But it does bear noting that I believe his Doctor actually, the form of combat he specified was Venusian karate, which is supposedly within that canon university karate style of the people of Venus. So we do know that the Doctor knows some form of self-defense. It's just a shame they never really expanded upon it in any of the regenerations since.
Yeah, that's a bit curious, really. It does seem like there were times, I think, Tim and Matt, that they were taking whatever was the new craze at the time and injecting it into the Doctor. So you had
that's what they've always done all through the show's history has changed with the times. I mean, look at the Sixth Doctor, which we will expand upon in a later episode. As you will see, at the time, people like to sort of bash his coat nowadays, but back then it was very sort of glam rock and flamboyant, much like the time period.
Oh, definitely very 1970s. That did, I think, to be fair, didn't really influence the storylines necessarily. But, oh, for God's sake, some of the costumes and sets, it has to be said, were a little bit silly back then, and perhaps looking very dated now. like everybody's going to have, jetpacks or whatever, according to them in the 50s. Jon Pertwee's era, though, was becoming more and more flamboyant, along with his hair, and that's how he got his monkia, which is dandy, yeah. But had some fantastic monsters and invasions. It did invasion stories very, very well. And one thing we haven't touched on, of course, is Unit. Something that really did sort of cement the Jon Pertwee era. How integral do you think Unit, all its components, Brigadier, Benton, Yates, was to the Third Doctor era and the Doctor himself?
I think it's the only time the show has a full guest cast of characters rather than just a companion. You've got a group of people that are grounded. I mean, in other words, it's not the same style of show anymore, and it's more about earthly invasions than time traveling. So, and it was a welcome change, I guess, at the time. I mean, why not? Why not make a different kind of series? It only lasted that way until he left, pretty much. I mean, or he had like one season to travel, 2 seasons to travel, I think, when he got his TARDIS fixed. But it really was grounded on Earth. I mean, the whole 5 years he was in the part.
Bit more flexible, really, because they were, in a sense, companions to him, but they could be going in and out all the time, which you can't necessarily do. And they tried that recently with the Ponds, in a sort of sense, didn't they? Sort of not necessarily always travelling or having adventures with them.
Yeah.
But that's the whole point. They could be off on missions of their own or something like that.
Yeah.
Well, it's just like the James Bond era where you had the suave, debonair guy who's working for a world organization, much like the Third Doctor is, where he's a guy working for a much larger organization, reporting to his commander, which will be the Brigadier, and all these gadgets and things like that. Just like James Bond. So.
Just like James Bond. And the army sort of bit, which they've tried since, and I'll be terribly honest, they can never really get that properly, that army family right again, because they all got along perfectly fine with each other. Jon Pertwee, Nicholas Courtney, they all actually were friends, on and off set. And that's the key to it, really. And they were together for the entire era, like Tim said, apart from that last year, which is rather curious. And as Matt said, everyone, really, Jon Pertwee's decision to leave was when people like Roger Delgado left. That's sort of, how do you put it, really? An actor needs, I think, to have a familiarity and consistency. And when they started to leave, Jon Pertwee's, the thing he built up during his era, started to feel not so home, just like William Hart.
Yeah, he
one thing too is he didn't really like Sarah Jane when Sarah Jane first started.
I wouldn't say
he kept
that.
He kept calling Elizabeth Sladen Zoe on set and everything. You can read it. You can read it in their autobiography. They did not like each other at first. So
really? Okay.
I
was gonna say that his guest cast was falling apart. I mean, Delgado left, Manning left, and obviously, as he was doing more time traveling, the Brigadier was going to be less and less of a guest star. So, I mean, and plus his producer was leaving, so I guess they all just decided to call it a day. And we got a brand new producer and a brand new Doctor the next season. So, and we carried on with the same companion. But in other words, he felt it was time to go, I think. And 5 years is enough for a Doctor, I would say, even back then.
I think the one thing about the Jon Pertwee era the most is that it cemented the element of having a real connection with Earth, unlike the first two Doctors, because he was basically trapped on Earth. You've got a hell of a lot of British locations, really. You know, Wales, oh dear, and no offence, Stephen Price, and places like the West Midlands, like Yorkshire, wherever they went to. So he was sort of, I think that's when he really formed the connection, because before he was wandering through time and space, but this time he had to reluctantly, in fact he hated it, the third Doctor. He wanted to leave as soon as possible. The first and second season he did, first with Liz Shaw, what a brilliant, way ahead of its time character, to the point that even the producers couldn't really make her work properly with any justice. A feminist character, really. And then, of course, with Joe Grant, he wanted every few episodes to take any opportunity he could to leave, almost in a master type way, you know.
Yeah.
So showcase the British Isles in a way that they never have done before. Sorry, go ahead, Tim.
No, I was going to say, sometimes his motives were questionable in the story. Like, he would do something that, you know, he might not do something that nice to try and get away, you know. Like maybe in the Claws of Axos, he tries to, they all think maybe he's going to betray them. And he doesn't, of course, but I mean, it looks for a minute like he may in fact betray them and just leave the world, right?
Yeah. It looks like he might actually cooperate with the Master, perhaps, simply to have the option of leaving. There is one bit where he does actually leave in the TARDIS. He leaves them behind in the TARDIS or something like that. Yeah, he gets in the TARDIS with the attitude, I'm leaving and I'm not coming back. And due to, I think that's in the first few stories, season 7.
Yeah.
And it dematerializes and it looks like he's gone, and then he just sort of ends up on a rubbish tip instead.
Yeah. That was in Inferno, I believe.
Constantly trying, in the same way that the producers in his early days would have been doing, tinkering with the TARDIS console. Yeah.
Some of the earlier producers of the show, though, the earlier years, didn't really like where the show had gone. They said he had become too much of an establishment character, that the Doctor was supposed to be anti-establishment. And by him joining the military, so to speak, made him far too much of an establishment figure.
He was anti-establishment, and he was very moralistic. He was always clashing with, you know, politician-type characters, like in the Silurians. But the problem is, Jon Pertwee's Doctor would be as the posh establishment type. So, really, in a bizarre way, he was and always has been anti-establishment. But in Jon Pertwee's body, just like the first Doctor, he looks and sounds like an authoritarian. Yeah. If you see what I mean.
Yeah.
Well, the first Doctor did describe him as a dandy, so to speak.
Yeah. Flamboyant. A seeker of knowledge and wisdom. Which is what led to his downfall in the Planet of the Spiders, where Violet's interest in, you know, meditation and Buddhism two episodes shaved off, really. And like this greed for knowledge led him eventually to his downfall, to the Metabedis crystals, cave of crystals, destroying the cells of your body, as the great Queen says. I am the Queen, which has different connotations nowadays. But the Queen Spider, played by the widow of Roger Delgado, it's perfect for Jon Pertwee's Doctor, bizarrely enough. He's rushed into it, He's wanted to find out the secret of the crystal, and he got what he wanted.
Mm.
And it's been shown again and again with the Doctor, oddly enough, his desire for knowledge or adventure eventually leads him astray. And henceforth that's how the Doctor regenerates into the Fourth Doctor. His body is damaged by the Metabedes crystals, Cho-Chi, a Time Lord. Which is rather curious. Pushes themselves to basically sort of like you do with a car, battery type thing, jump-start it, and he changes into probably the most recognisable Doctor of all, Tom Baker.
Mm-hmm.
So, let's discuss Mr. Stephen Coles.
First of all, I think the reason why Tom Baker was so memorable is because he was playing the part of an alien. And if you look at it, Tom Baker was a guy who had been a monk and had been in isolation for many years. So he was kind of a living sort of alien, otherworldly type fellow. So I guess it kind of was the perfect part for him in a way.
I think he's the first Doctor that brings so much of himself to the part. He's really just playing himself, which is a model that subsequent Doctors, many of them, have also used. But he's definitely playing himself. I mean, even today in interviews, Tom Baker says, "I am the Doctor. I mean, that's who I was, or that's who I am." So.
Indeed.
Did you actually feel that when you got into his Doctor, that this wasn't just simply an actor playing the Doctor?
Not really. I mean, I was much younger when I was watching that for the first time, and I had no idea what Doctor Who was. That was the first I'd seen or heard of it, and I thought it was amazing. It was a very fun show to watch. And then, of course, you learn about the history. You learn that you're really in the middle of it, actually. I mean, and it just goes and goes. It never really stops, except for those few years it was off the air. So, but as far as him acting the part, I had no idea he was just, playing himself pretty much.
You have a series which returns basically to its roots, in a sense, with the first Dr. William Hartnell. And as you said, he still believes himself in a way to be the Doctor. So the question is Tom Baker a little bit, how should I put it, doolally, maybe, so believing in being the Doctor that perhaps sometimes he can't actually tell the difference?
Yeah, definitely. I heard an interview with him recently. He said it's the most fun he ever had. That's why he stayed with it so long too. They kind of had to boot him out towards the end, really. He would have done it forever. It was the time of his life, he says, He never had any more fun on a job since.
Now, he started off with the companion who began her journeys with the third Doctor, which is, of course, Sarah Jane Smith, and probably one of the best duos, really, until the 7th and 8th, I think.
Yeah, definitely. She was brilliant. Liz Sladen says that, you have to play the part as if it's very real. That's the way she would do it. It's real. You don't go in there acting a part. You just, you have to be convincing to convince the audience that what they're seeing is real.
Indeed.
Well, now, it does seem as though they, as actors, were perfect for each other, more than perhaps any of the other companions, because the Fourth Doctor had many, many companions. Out of all the Doctors, he seems really, I suppose you could argue, a bit like the 10th and 11th Doctors, sort of running away from, something which presumably would discover what it is in the 50th anniversary story.
Yeah, definitely. He was a reaction to, I'll have to get up for a second, excuse me.
A reaction to what do you think? Just before we come back and finishes it off, Matt.
Well, yeah, just like you were saying, when you act, you really have to. I can't tell you how many times growing up in school we'd have these morning sort of TV anchor-like announcements where people from around the school would be charged to do it. And you would have them like a news anchor setting, and it would be just the most boring, drab things. Like instead of saying, "That lunch menu sounds delicious," they would be like, "That lunch menu sounds delicious. I am just reading off a cue card with no emotion whatsoever."
Yeah, that sounds like school. So Tim, go on again. Yes, go on, Matt. A reaction.
Go ahead. I was just saying.
I think it's a reaction, actually. I read his autobiography, which is Who on Earth is Tom Baker, and from the sound of it, he didn't have much of a happy relationship with the mother-in-law of the mother of one of his wives, a complete bitch, apparently. And also there's the fact, like you said, he was actually training up to be a monk, just like Sylvester McCoy, the scent doctor, did, years before he even started acting. So, is it possible that that sense of being a wanderer and a unique rebel might have been from his personal family experiences, and also, perhaps, from the fact that as a monk you have to abstain from drink and sex and all sorts of lovely, exciting stuff.
You have to abstain yourself from all the earthly vices, so to speak, of this planet. So it's kind of like he was playing an alien being, somebody who was not connected with earthly ways. So that's why whenever he says a line like, "Oh, you are just an earthling, you wouldn't understand. I'm a Time Lord, I'm different than you, I walk in eternity." Which is basically what a monk believes. A monk believes that it has spiritual enlightenment to the point where it has a greater understanding than the average person. So
isolation, basically. His personal experience was isolation. And a sign of being isolated is that you do sometimes, I know myself, develop a sort of fantasy world or an eccentric personality, which is a behaviour trait of your brain, your mind, dealing with how totally up your own arse your life is. You said, metaphorically speaking.
Mm-hmm.
But he's an eccentric character. I mean, seriously, what a perfect contrast to Jon Pertwee. So, Tim, you were saying about Doctor was a reaction to what?
To being stuck on Earth for 3 or 4 years. He wanted to be free of the Brigadier, like he says at the beginning of the Pyramids of Mars. I have more important things to do than run around after him, and he wants to be an explorer of the universe like he once was, and like he is today.
He doesn't care about earthly bondage. He wants to explore himself, to find things. And again, that's where we go back to him being a monk. It's very much like that. You don't want to be confined to this sort of earthly mortal coil. You want to explore what's out there and what's deeper than just mortal enjoyment or mortal life. You want to explore beyond, so to speak.
Yeah. Beyond confined to one planet.
Yes.
Beyond the universe of adventure which he was having.
I agree. But yes, it's
he doesn't know where it ends and starts, and neither does the viewer. So it feels like this person literally could appear in your room in a blue box and take you off. which wasn't a feeling pattern for some ways that even long-time Doctor Who fans would have until David Tennant's Doctor, really. Enthusiasm, in other words, absolute enthusiasm, to the point that burnout. You know? David Tennant is very much the same. Like he said, when he pointed out he was leaving at the Masters 2009 or 2008, he said, otherwise they'd have to, drag me basically out of being Doctor Who in a wheelchair or whatever.
Yeah, I think Smith said the same thing recently, that if he'd done another year, he'd probably want to do another 3 or so. So it's better to leave when you're on top.
That's how you know that a person will give their all to a part when they want to be there and they're not just doing it for a paycheck. And I would hope that's what Peter Capaldi is going to be like, because he had that sort of connection to the show that David Tennant did growing up. David Tennant loved Doctor Who growing up, and so does Peter Capaldi. So I'm hoping for the same level of commitment.
Well, oddly enough, there's a comment I've read yesterday or something like that, where Tom Baker said he hasn't actually watched any Doctor Who his own. But again, when you are the Doctor, considered literally the real Doctor maybe in some circles, then you don't need to, because you were there for real.
I saw a quote one time, the only time he ever saw himself in the part was one time when he ran into a family on the street, and they just happened to be watching it on their TV, and they invited him in for tea or something, and so he actually saw himself playing the Doctor, and he said he never went out of his way to try and catch himself, or want to see it. But he played the Doctor in character in real life too. When he would see kids on the street, like he would act like the Doctor. He wouldn't smoke cigarettes in front of them and stuff like that. He was aware of how important his role as a role model was.
Going back to the point of staying too long in the role, there's a feeling that maybe he might have done that, because by the end of the 70s, after Leela, Romana 1 and 2, K9 of course, excellent companions.
Wonderful.
He never travelled with more than one companion. Well, I don't include K9 because he's just a robot. No offence.
Yeah.
And one other thing. Sorry to interrupt, David, but one thing about it was that a lot of the doctors prior to Tom Baker didn't want to sit on because they had fear of being typecast. They sort of didn't want to make the show their life. Right. Tom Baker, on the other hand, wanted to be committed to that character. The other doctors, and a lot of the doctors after him, didn't want to be typecasted.
Right.
The problem is, though, Tim, I think it's fair to say, it might have been a mistake, because he did actually become a monk, bizarrely enough, after his time as the Doctor ended. He became a little bit reclusive, especially from the world of Doctor Who. Hence why he didn't appear in the Five Doctors.
Yeah, well, I think he felt bad. I think he felt badly treated also, but he did stay in it too long. I think he probably, if he had been smart, he would have left. I don't know, maybe a year or two previously. But the incoming team didn't want him around. They thought that the show had become too silly. They wanted to make a more serious science fiction type show, and they were ready to move on with another Doctor. What it is,
and that's what they did. Come 1980, everybody, John Nathan Turner, the new producer, decided not only to change the title sequence, vision and sound, but a brand new Starfield sequence, which became famous in its own right, just like the Tunnel sequence, but also a new synth 80s I still remember trying to imitate when I was a kid. And he had a burgundy, grey, reddish type big scarf and hat and stuff, a more sombre, almost funeral atmosphere. And unfortunately for Tom Baker, he just just like before, when he was in a good mood, the Fourth Doctor and his stories were in a good mood. If they weren't, and he was in a foul mood like that horror fan rock, or whatever it's called. The one where you see the Rutons for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
Throughout his last season, it is quite literally like somebody waiting to enter a funeral. In a
that's the thing.
The whole theme of that
he looks bored, he looks tired, and he looks like a doctor, Fourth Doctor, who kind of knows his lifespan is coming to an end.
And that works to good effect for that season.
The whole theme of the seasons is entropy and the aging and slow disintegration of things. And you get a lot of episodes that deal with that too, like State of Decay, which deals with, trying to preserve immortality and ultimately failing at that. So basically that whole season was to teach the lesson that death comes to us all. And I think they capitalized upon that by showcasing that even the Doctor, an immortal being, had to die innocent at some point. And he sort of prepares for that moment with the Watcher, doesn't he? He kind of foresees that, and he wants to leave his companions in a good state of being. So he does a lot to sort of, without anybody realizing it, slowly prepare so they can accept his eventual demise.
Mm-hmm.
That's very true indeed. Every story has some sort of plot line that deals with people trying to escape their fate or death itself. False Certainty, State of Decay, Legopolis, which is all about the entropy increasing at the start, and the erosion of time itself, and the destruction of the universe, or certain people in wheelchairs making lots of noise when they're slurping on cups.
Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. And the last, another thing which you could call a sort of living death, if you like, the introduction of Adric. And some would say the first stages of Doctor Who dumbing down, not trying as hard as much before, something for Tom Baker which was worse than ever than anything, than having not just two companions, but effing three of them.
Yeah. The problem is that the incoming producer and script editor didn't feel, they felt that the TARDIS team that we had before was far too clever. I mean, you had a doctor, you had a lady doctor practically in Romana, and then you had a robot dog that could blast them out of everything, right? So they wanted to make it. I don't know why. I mean, Adric is not even a good idea on paper. He's just he's horrible. The actor's horrible. The character's horrible.
I mean,
the only reasonably good companion they managed to create was for the later episodes and the later Doctor was Nyssa, in fact. And I gotta get again.
Yeah, good old Nyssa.
Yeah. Tegan was just some whiny expletive removed, but
well, at first, yeah, but she did sort of mellow out. But you mentioned the cloister bell, Matt. Why didn't it ring before Adric turned up? It didn't work.
That's the only sort of emotion he ever put in any of his lines. The cloister bell.
Adric. Matthew Waterhouse's. Yeah, you can't really blame the scripts this time because Matthew Waterhouse has vastly changed those days. But
I did like his death scene though. I thought that was really powerful. The Doctor was just
any good thing he did was die.
No one never thought that was right.
John Nathan Turner is gay. Matthew Waterhouse is gay. That's why he retired, I think, personally. But that's all I'm going to say. And leaders saying Logopoulos, as Matt pointed out, an entire season of decay and people trying to basically cheat death had the Master once again after this end of season story, if you like, whereby the Doctor did actually finally face up and give in, so to speak, to his death. Falling off Project Telescope in the final minutes and regenerating into the first Doctor of the 80s.
And the first blonde Doctor.
The New Romantics Doctor, is
the only one to
he went from sticking his hand in animals' bombs to holding the solid screwdriver, which is another sexual euphemism, if you want to. So, let's talk about the Fifth Doctor, Peter Davison, a rebirth again for Doctor Who. What's your opinions on the cricketer, the scaredy cat, if you like, the Braveheart Tegan Doctor?
Well, I think right off the bat you see that this Doctor is, of course, more human than the very alien Tom Baker. You definitely see that he goes through, I think, the most traumatic regeneration and the most drawn out regeneration you could ever have, where he tries to heal himself in the zero and make it citizen, and he spent half the story regenerating in a box, so to speak. Not the way I would have written his first story right off the bat, but
how would you have written the Fifth Doctor's first story, both of you? Briefly.
I don't know, but I would have kept the scene where he comes charging in on an electrical chair. I did like that.
Is there any way connected to the fact that you're in a wheelchair by any chance, Mark?
Well, I don't know. I just thought it was kind of funny the way he just, out of the way, I'll save you. Pretty.
Yeah, the Chariot of Deluxe or something like that. That's rather clever, actually. Basically, a sort of medical room in the TARDIS, just in case the Time Lord's having trouble regenerating. And that, brilliant. Casavolva has some fantastic science fiction ideas. And just like Tim said before, they wanted to get rid of Tom Baker's era, because it apparently got a little bit silly to a certain point. And this is one of the elements
and
I guess
it did, because you kind of had Tom Baker in like every sort of situation imaginable, and there wasn't really much timey-wimey stuff going on. But right off the bat from Castrovalva, you can already see all this stuck in a time loop. There's time this, and computation and things like that. All that stuff.
Very sort of deep, some of it. But that's not how the 3 years of the Fifth Doctor progressed. It actually sort of lapsed a little bit, I think.
Yeah. Not a whole lot of Davison's stories are actually pretty memorable compared to, Genesis of the Daleks or Logopoulos or any of the ones like that. All anybody can really remember is Castrovalva and the Caves of Androzani. Maybe the Ark of Infinity, but that's about it.
Well, I don't think that's all people remember him for, just 2 stories or 3.
Yeah. Well, there is the Key to Time saga, and maybe the Dalek story, too.
The one featuring the Daleks?
Yep.
I am a Dalek, is my story.
You kind of also see in that sort of story, you kind of see the human side of the Doctor shining through, where he doesn't have the guts to shoot Davros. Sort of like in Genesis of the Daleks, where he says, "Do I have the right to kill another living being?" And I guess that is proved to be his downfall more often than not, is perhaps he cares too much for every living thing.
And that's shown in the Fifth Doctor. It was shown before in other Doctors, but here he has a more sort of, not just necessarily caring connection to the companions, but also a sort of argumentative side at start. He's more cautious. He's more of a scaredy cat, like I said.
My impression was that he was,
like the whole show, more younger.
Yeah, my impression
He's more down to earth.
Yeah, Tim?
Well, my impression was that, here you got a younger and more naive Doctor. We're getting to see him when he's younger, sort of. Same man, but just as a younger, more naive character. He doesn't have any of that wisdom. Or if he does, he's not very adept at using it. As later younger Doctors are. I mean, you can see an old man in Matt Smith, but you don't really see that in Peter Davison.
Which is odd, because he did actually say, or rather in hindsight, he said that he wanted to play an old man in a younger man's body. The idea that even though he has the outside human appearance of a young, at the time, the most youngest person to play the Doctor, the actual appearance of the Doctor is ancient. And it was only really till, the final story of season 3 of the new series that we actually saw how the Doctor really looks. His regeneration form apparently isn't really how he really looks, you know what I mean? And I think you're right, he didn't really pull it off. But unfortunately for Peter Davison, this is when the script started.
I was just going to say, this is the beginning of the end of the series. It's frozen again. This is the beginning of the end of the series, because you had bad scripts coming in, you had a really overpopulated TARDIS, really bad production decisions on lots of things, and there's really only a handful of good Fifth Doctor stories, in my opinion. The rest of it is really, really bad. Some of it is really bad. And it's not the actor's fault. It's not the actor's fault. Peter Davison is a good actor. He's always been a good actor. But he was given a rough deal, I think. I mean, and it just went downhill from there, really.
So, really, like I said about Matt Smith, after a long, glorious, golden era of scripts and, publicity and good vibrations, just like the Fourth Doctor, or the Tenth Doctor, you have a Fifth and 11th Doctor who is having to deal with a show that's perhaps not as confident as somebody walking out during a live broadcast. After the Fourth Doctor, Peter Davison had a BBC that wasn't as confident as it used to do. And there are some absolutely brilliant stories like Enlightenment or Black Orchid. But to be terribly frank, this is the Doctor, not the one that I became a fan with, but the very first one I can remember seeing. Vaguely seen, but I don't think his era really fulfilled its potential. The Sixth Doctor has an excuse because he didn't have a full lifespan.
You could make an argument that none of the Doctors after that fulfill their potential.
So I'm just putting him off there.
Especially number 6.
The beginning of the end, you said, Tim.
I feel, that's when the crack started to show. I mean, of course it's all hindsight, but if you look at his entire run, how many really good stories are there? Not many, just a handful. And ironically, his last one is one of the best ones ever, and yet it's his last one. And you know what? Actually, he insisted he was only going to do 3 years. He was advised by Trout to do 3 years. But I think he's also said since that had he known they were going to pair him up with one girl and go from there, like he wanted to from the beginning. He never wanted all those companions. then he might have stuck around for another year. But rather than try to keep him in the part, Nathan Turner decides, well, I mean, look how much publicity we're going to get. Whenever we get a new doctor, it means big publicity for the show. So he'd rather kick the old guy out and get a new guy than try and persuade the old guy to stay for an extra year.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's appalling. I mean, that's just, you know, because Davison could have done another year, and if it had just been him and Perry, it might have been a lot better setup for it. Easier to tell better stories anyway. Although it didn't really go down that way with Colin Baker, I guess.
Colin Baker could have had a brilliant run if he would have stayed another year. His story had finally picked up after the trial of a Time Lord saga. But then, of course, by then there was far too many writing troubles, and you know the story.
Yeah.
It does seem to me, though, bizarrely, that they got the Fifth Doctor really well done. Perfectly done. In his last story. That is really how the Fifth Doctor should have been from the start. And he was, in a way, but the problem is it had too many companions. They had too much argument. It became a soap opera. I think killing off Adric, for several million reasons, was a good idea. It was something that needed to happen, because it hadn't happened for, nearly 20 years.
And Tegan gets written out at the end of the next story, and they should have just left her written out. They brought her back, and she's the mouthy one that no offense to the actress or the character, I don't have a problem with either of them that much, but I'm just saying, why not just go with him and Nyssa? And it would have been a much better show. That's what Davison kept on saying. Please, can't you just have me and Nyssa? I mean, why this bossy Australian, you know?
Yeah.
And, you know, like you were saying, ironically, in the last episode, it's just him and a girl. They're thrown into an impossible situation, and he spends the entire story trying to save a girl he's just met. And what a hero. That's what I'm saying. That's why it's such a good episode, because he loses his life saving a girl he just met. He doesn't even know her hardly.
It does seem there was less focus and concentration on scripts or logic as there had been in the 70s. And I think it's telling that their best stories were written. I mean, his best story as a Doctor was written by Robert Holmes, who had done some of the best stories in the 70s, dark, gritty ones. I don't think his era was a complete failure, but you could say the same criticisms to a certain extent with the Third Doctor. But I think the truth is, the BBC, as early as 1981, was getting fed up with Doctor Who.
It was.
And they weren't really doing one thing that I think should have happened at the start of the 80s. They should have really have updated and pumped more money. Perhaps even given it 1 year off to sort of come back refreshed or something like that. So
ended up doing that later.
So, in summing up, how would you describe 1970 to 1984 for the show?
Probably the show's golden era, I would say. That's where the show made most of its bones.
I would agree with that to a point. I'd probably say more like 70 to 80. Because I do think it kind of fell apart in the 80s. Also, during that period, though, it was becoming a big hit in America, at least a cult hit, because we were getting to see it over here. We were watching episodes years later after they'd been broadcast over there. But you got a lot of fans into it during that time. Actually, that was during the 80s. I mean, but it was those episodes we were watching from the 70s.
Interesting. Very interesting. So, in essence, really, Doctor Who, you could argue in some ways, was on its way sort of a rat down a drain pipe from 81 onwards. I don't think it's too bad. But yeah, there's some amazing stories and some amazing stories not for an amazingly positive way. But the third, fourth and fifth Doctors were really the last three Doctors where the BBC and even, I'm afraid, the people behind the scenes seem to care about the show.
To be honest with you, I don't know how much.
Or lack of
I don't know how much the BBC ever cared about the show, really, in terms of making it their golden child. I don't think they ever really saw as much potential in it as the original creators did.
Yeah.
Because even during the Adventure in Space and Time docudrama, I'm sure you're going to see where the creators had to fight tooth and nail to convince the BBC that this was a worthwhile program. And I don't think they ever really thought at any one point, even during Tom Baker's era, that this was a show they really had to invest money in.
Right.
I still don't think they think that, even today, which is why, I hate to sound biased because I'm an American, but I think a large part of whose success today, whose success is because it resonates with the American audience, and BBC knows that's where the money is, and that's why they are just now starting to glorify it like it's something they always treasured. But really, I don't think they ever really have treasured it as much as they let on. You know what I mean? I think it's
I would agree. I think
it's all just sort of after the fact.
The first 15 to 20 years, it was just an accidental thing that was going on in the background as far as the BBC was concerned, and it didn't really bother them until
It didn't bother them, and then come to probably season 17,
the 80s,
when its fandom grew, isn't it?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then they should have realised, hang on a second, this is bigger than we think.
But even then, even today, I don't think they even now still fully care about it, because even Stephen Moffat said, I wanted to release the 50th anniversary trailer way earlier, but the BBC wouldn't let me because they figured they got other shows to promote.
Unfortunately, that's something that would become even more apparent, which will lead us into the next Doctor Who radio show. Next time I have been That's the Way It Goes, Onan. Thanks for watching and listening. And these lovely gents, who are thankful for their time and all their passion, have been
Matt from Florida.
And Tim from Texas.
So until next time, prepare yourself to enter a horrible period of time for Whovians. After the birthday celebrations of the 20th anniversary, 30 years ago now, it was quite simply time for a nice quiet hiatus.
Yeah.